the day she rebuilt the table. Danielle Rains had never needed validation. She wasn't the type to seek applause or reassurance. As a self-made billionaire, every room she entered carried the echo of her silent reputation, someone who didn't just play the game but redesigned the board entirely. That morning in Manhattan, she walked into the boardroom of Polaris Technologies not to negotiate, not to charm, but to confirm a deal she had already architected in her mind. It should have been routine. But then Jonathan Marlowe, CEO of Polaris, didn't shake her hand. It was subtle, almost forgettable if it weren't so deliberate. Danielle had offered her hand across the sleek glass table, a gesture of both civility and authority. Jonathan didn't even blink. He looked at her hand, then back up at her with an expression that suggested she didn't exist. "We're done here," he muttered as he turned his back. The room went still. Analysts, investors, assistants, all eyes were on her, unsure of what would happen next. But Danielle didn't blink. She simply lowered her hand and turned to face her executive assistant, Carmen Ellis, who stood silently at her side. Carmen gave a single, knowing nod. The kind of nod only two women who had clawed their way through impossible systems could understand. Danielle pulled out her phone and made a call. Terminate the Helix agreement. Effective immediately. The silence deepened. Jonathan's posture stiffened. Everyone in the room knew what the Helix deal meant. It was a cornerstone partnership projected to generate over $1.2 billion in revenue. Without it, Polaris' Q4 expansion plan was dead on arrival. "You'll lose everything," Jonathan said, now facing her, pale and incredulous. "We'll rebuild," Danielle replied, voice calm but unyielding. "But you? Your Q4 just evaporated." As she and Carmen turned to leave, no one moved. No one breathed. Because in one sentence, Danielle had turned the balance of power upside down. And the fall had only just begun. 2 weeks earlier, Danielle and her daughter Isla had been walking home through the streets of Brooklyn. The rain had just stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective under streetlights. Despite her immense wealth, Danielle still lived not far from the neighborhood where she'd grown up. She believed in roots. Isla was 16 and fiercely opinionated, and Danielle wanted her to understand that wealth meant nothing if you lost touch with where you came from. That night, they shared takeout on the couch, laughing about Isla's latest attempt to teach their cat to sit. The world knew Danielle as the head of Rains Capital, a firm managing over $50 billion in assets. But at home, she was just mom. The following morning, Carmen joined Danielle at their private office above a quiet brownstone. Carmen, like Danielle, had earned everything. A former waitress and single mom, she'd worked her way through school, survived hardship most wouldn't understand, and became one of the sharpest strategic minds in finance. "Big meeting today," Carmen said, holding up her tablet. "Polaris wants full partnership. They're finally at the table." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "The same Polaris that ignored us 3 years ago?" Carmen grinned. "Apparently, they're ready to talk now." Danielle sipped her coffee. "Let's see if they remember how to shake hands." The Polaris headquarters in Midtown Manhattan was a monolith of glass and ambition. When Danielle and Carmen arrived, it was clear the company had spared no expense. A receptionist led them past open-concept workspaces, vertical gardens, and minimalist artwork. Everything screamed curated success. But when they entered the boardroom, something shifted. Jonathan Marlowe didn't stand, didn't greet them, didn't offer water. Carmen began the pitch, flawlessly outlining the logistics of the partnership. Danielle added insight and clarity, guiding the conversation like a maestro. The analyst murmured approval, nodding at projections and forecasts. Then Jonathan interrupted. "I see your numbers," he said, voice clipped. "But I still don't see why we need you." The condescension was unmistakable. Danielle looked him in the eye. "Because without our capital, your expansion plan dies in Q4. Carmen slid a file across the table. "Your own projections, amended with our corrections." "You're welcome." Jonathan leaned back, ignoring the file. "Interesting. But I think we'll take our chances." Danielle rose from her seat. Calm, unshaken. She walked slowly around the table and extended her hand again. "Are you sure about that?" Jonathan didn't even look at her. He turned his back and muttered, "We're done here." That was when Danielle made the call. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Polaris stock began to dip. By the next day, the Helix partners had issued a statement of withdrawal. Industry insiders whispered about the mysterious phone call that had detonated the deal. Rumors swirled. And then the leaks began. Carmen brought Danielle a tablet filled with files. Anonymous internal emails from Polaris. They spoke in coded language about optics, containment, and something called the Van Holt Protocol. Danielle read them in silence, then asked, "Who's Van Holt?" "Elizabeth Van Holt," Carmen said. "Chairwoman of Polaris Board." Danielle leaned back. She knew the name. Everyone did. Van Holt was a shadow player, respected in public, feared in private. The kind of woman who had built her power in backrooms and backdoors. "She's not just complicit," Carmen said. "She's architected this whole thing." There was more. Carmen scrolled to a different file. Payments to ghost companies. Fake diversity programs. Misuse of federal tech grants. And this. A name appeared on the screen. Isaac Brennan. Danielle's breath caught. Isaac had once been her business partner. The man who helped her launch her first fund. The man who betrayed her. "You're telling me Isaac is involved?" she asked quietly. "More than involved," Carmen said. "He's the leak." It was betrayal layered on top of systemic corruption. Danielle closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, they were filled with resolve. "Then we go to war." They met a contact in a nondescript building on the city's edge, a whistleblower from within Polaris. The person handed over a flash drive. Inside were emails, voice memos, chat logs. Years of buried secrets. Among them, a recording. Jonathan and Elizabeth Van Holt. Plotting. "If Raines gets a hold of the Q2 initiative," Jonathan's voice said, "she'll dominate policy until 2030. Van Holt replied coldly, "Leak a scandal. Create a media storm. If she fights back, kill the fund." Danielle's hands curled into fists. She had built her empire from scratch. And now they wanted to erase her because she was finally close to changing the rules. "We exposed them," she told Carmen. "All of them. They flew to Washington, D.C., their legal team working nonstop." Danielle didn't want revenge. She wanted reform. They entered the Senate Oversight Committee chambers with evidence, financial documents, emails, recorded meetings. Senators murmured in confusion, unsure why a businesswoman had come to speak. But Danielle wasn't there to ask for permission. "You've ignored this for too long," she said. On the screen behind her, the recording played. Jonathan and Elizabeth discussing manipulation, policy control, political favors. The room gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. "This isn't just corporate corruption," Danielle said. "This is systemic manipulation of public policy. This is theft disguised as progress." When Margaret Lawrence, the newly appointed Secretary of Commerce, was linked to the scandal, the dominoes began to fall. Margaret had used her position to funnel contracts to Van Holt's shell companies. Billions in public funds gone. The Axiom Project, a fake tech diversity initiative, was revealed to be a laundering scheme. Under pressure, Margaret resigned. The headlines the next day were seismic. Rainscape, inside the woman who exposed Washington's biggest corporate fraud. Danielle didn't celebrate. She got to work. Weeks later, she stood on stage at the National Equity Summit in Atlanta. The room was packed with founders, builders, creators. Danielle announced the launch of Rebuild the Table, a $500 million incubator fund to support underrepresented tech founders. "We're not asking for a seat anymore," Danielle said. "We're building a new table." The crowd erupted. But for Danielle, it was more than applause. It was the sound of a new system being born. A system not built on exclusion, but empowerment. And this time, no one could stop it.